So here we go. I'm going to start off by showing a bit of video that's literally just came off the machine last night, but it kind of will hopefully cue you into some of the work that I'm doing and what I'm doing with the stuff that I'm gathering, I guess. So hopefully this will play. That's good. So this is so this morning we went on a walk, and part of the walk that we did was into the work that I've been doing that looks at the obscured heritage, the reluctant heritage of Bath around the slave trade. Next weekend I'm doing an installation in an old brass mill down the river where goods were made to go on the slaving ships from Bristol. Brass goods were made to go on the slaving ships from Bristol to be traded for human beings on the west coast of Africa, and eventually in that kind of trading triangle, the wealth and the sugar came back to Bath. And just to sort of so you get an idea of where I'm going, I'll play a little bit of this. I'm kind of interested to see what it looks like. I've been doing a series of walks down the river from here to Bristol and sensing legacies of slave ownership and gathering records, and other people, the people who've been walking with me have contributed stuff by social media. So this sequence here was shot by one of the walkers, and I've been kind of sort of playing with it. And the brass mill is still running. It still has a water mill there, and we're going to be filling the space with these series of projections. The orientation and information that the brass mill has got is still there. So we're kind of working with that existing stuff in the museum, with giving kind of telling their story in a slightly different way. So the exhibition in the museum has Neptunes, which were kind of pots, brass pots, which were made to go on the boats. And Champion is the name of the owner of a set of the mills. And these are all from the port books of slaving ships that went out to Africa from Bristol in the 1750s, 1770s. So I'm working with stuff that's gathered along the way. Stuff, both video stuff, postings that people have given to me, and have contributed as we've been running through the walk. So I'm going to stop that there and get out of that one, and come into the presentation. Okay, so this is the bit that I've prepared. I kind of chuck that in at the beginning to sort of see where I was going. So there was a lot of talk yesterday about maps, and kind of took me into reminding myself really of a project that I did several years ago now. I co-hosted a walk around the White Horse chalk figures. So those of you that are not familiar with this part of the world, on the North Wessex Downs, on the chalk downs, there are white horses cut into the downs. And this was a 5-day, 100-mile walk that involved banners, locative media soundscapes, all linked to an installation in the Wiltshire Museum. Walkers were encouraged to tweet and post social media from the walk, and this was aggregated onto an open platform accessible to visitors at the installation as a live feed. The idea being that visitors to the museum could engage with the walk as we were actually doing it, so they could comment on what we were up to and add to the stream. And at the end of it, somebody wrote in the visitors book, "The map is not the territory." And I thought, what the hell was that all about? I thought, well, first of all, this is some academic kind of bamboozling me and trying to take the piss. But then that phrase stuck. And so, what happens is, well, then you go and find out, well, who was it? And so now I know this is Kaczynski's dictum. So thinking this one through, it seemed very appropriate for these few days. So the map is not the territory, it's a representation, it's a partial perspective masquerading as truth. And I'm still fascinated by that, and I kind of keep going back to that and thinking, well, what's being represented here and who's in charge and so on. But increasingly, I'm resisting that whole signification and wanting to immerse myself in the territory to describe the shapes and feelings that kind of burst and tear through the fabric of the map. So as I kind of run through this, I'm going to talk a bit about my practice and then dip into some of the ways in which I'm using, in particular the social media that I'm using, so you get a kind of sense of the practicalities of what I'm doing. But I'm trying to work through some ideas really, for this PhD that I'm supposed to be writing up at the moment. So excuse me dropping in some sort of rather heavy-duty theory stuff that I'm still thinking my way through. Anyway, so I walk and I use social media, and I'm experimenting with a networked walking arts practice, exploring how and in what way we can attend to obscured or reluctant heritage. By which I mean kind of silences and absences, stories concealed or not told, memories lost or not valued. Often it's the heritage of those who are reluctant to acknowledge what happened or their part in it, or recognise its resonances in the present. So on a walk, I hope to initiate an enhanced awareness of our bodies and sensations, and to provoke empathic responses, conversations, and raise awareness around that reluctant heritage. So Hamish Fulton, famous walking artist, he stated that a walk has a life of its own and doesn't need to be materialised in artwork. Well, that's all true, but I'm really keen to activate opportunities to materialise, or opportunities for materialisation, whilst the walk is still live. We had a very lightning practice with notebooks today, and I use that a lot, gathering stuff, picking up bits and pieces, and of course posting social media whilst the walk is running. I often describe my walks as disenchantments. Bath, for many, is the enchanted city. The architecture, the hot springs, the surrounding countryside. We might enjoy the enjoyment of an autumn walk or a visit to a country house in which we suspend time and critical thought. In my walking, I seek to disrupt that enchantment with interventions and provocations as a tactic to provoke empathy or to remind us of ourselves, and thus to reveal partial perspectives and limited locations. So I'm picking up here on Donna Haraway's work, and I see that through this it will enable us to become answerable for what we learn and see. As we walk, we make and remake knowledge, and in a way, we remake ourselves. The walks that I lead are not always pleasurable walks in the park. They're all walks taken by choice, often in response to or bearing witness to something over which other people had no choice. So a recent project that finished earlier this year was retracing a Nazi death march, enslavement, poverty. Walking and taking time to be thoughtful and critical about who we are, where we are, and what we are experiencing, to have conversations and to be silent. Walking with other people generates questions, stories, and a kind of sense of solidarity. We share stories of place, like it was interesting that Santiago's last previous presentation. We share personal stories, urban and rural myths, affinities to place, the custodial sense of belonging that some people have about place, or that sense of disconnection, exile and displacement others have or has been imposed upon them. Questions go deeper to ask about what's not there, or why it is still there, and where did the money come from, and deeper still into the body, not so much as questions, but as a questioning. An interrogation of bodily experience, getting to a point before signification where I'm feeling and sensing and I'm truly in my body. And we got a glimpse of that, somebody said, coming up the steep, the last bit up to Lansdowne Crescent there, that kind of one. I'm interested in long walks where it just pushes you out so that you're into your body. Walking, knowledge making, is about affect and perception, as well as the intellectual process of naming and discourse. Phenomenologists consider walking as a perfect metaphor of how we build up a coherent core world from the fragmentary appearances our senses present to us. And again, we had a bit of that previously. And coordinate that in motion. We literally get ourselves together, stand up and walk. A child's steps are tricky, precarious, full of stumbling and falls, always about imbalance, as finally she learns to resist, create onward momentum and move with the downward pull of gravity. Walking as a creative practice is just as wobbly, messy and uncertain. I'm learning at every step I make. So Masumi talks about gravity. I'm trying to take that metaphor and the practice a bit further. I'm experimenting with the intra-actions of body and place as they manifest in memory, story, movement, rest and sensation. In that sense of the mesh that Tim Morton talks about in the ecological thought, this is all connected. The more we recognise and attend to the connections, the more ways of sustainable living are revealed. I thought there was an element of that in the think tank earlier on. So looking back at those chalk white horses, they only survive because people have a story for them. They only survive because people have weeded and cleared them. They grow over. The Uffington white horse here, wonderful thing, hard archaeological evidence dates that back to the Bronze Age. So that means that it's had a material significance in people's lives for generation and generation, maybe 3,000 years. So the map is not the territory, it's a representation. Someone has drawn the map and exercised their control over how the territory is to be described, what features included and what left out. Such is the story of how Africa was carved up and how the British Empire dismissed the entire continent of Australia as terra nullius, nothing there. Only recently have the survivors of those colonial genocides been able to reclaim a belonging to the land and stake their sense of country. This assertion of intangible cultural heritage renews, reintroduces valuable ways of knowing and being. It's the ecological thought. So for the past 2 years, I've been working on the Sweet Waters project, which I'll just give you a bit of a taste of some of the outputs are going to be. Okay. So what I'll do is I will, if we can switch this over, then I'll jump it into the what I'm doing with this stuff. Ooh, okay. So I'm using, yeah, you can see that. So I'm using this is the what I'm doing. You took 2 bits of software. This one's called View Ranger, which very much kind of locates into the sort of hiking, walking sort of community. It's a commercial thing. And what it does, which I loved it when I first came about it. So it shows along the route, the walk. So this was the one walk, the kind of the culmination of the project, where we walked from Avonmouth on Midsummer's Day in June with the high tide and the sunrise, and we walked all the way through back up to Bath. And what it does is that it shows my tweets and anybody else's tweets who were using the hashtag. And it's later on, so you can stick your Flickr pictures into it as well. And it shows all kinds of other geeky things that walkers might be interested in knowing. It shows you where the speed of your walk and the up and downs and all of that kind of stuff. But it's a single thing. And what I was really excited to discover, which is what I'm using now, is the social hiking, which is much more of a kind of a community sort of thing. And as you can see, I've still got the thing on, so it thinks we're still live. So that's the that last one down there. So you can click on a walk, and you can see what's going on, and you can see there was a vast amount of tweets on this one. Just me at the beginning and me at the end, it shows that was the route of our walk today. So if you think that's cool, which I thought was when I first discovered it, it is. It's then, so I want to go back. Sleep on there, yeah, cool, okay. So it records all my maps, but what it enables me to do is, so the reason that I was after a few people's Twitter @tags is that I can aggregate that down to the one track. And so this gives me what they call combi maps. So I've got the whole cycle of walks there for Sweet Waters, which is that whole set of walks, including the early ones, one we did from here, the Utopia Dystopia one, a year ago. And so then that gives me, when it loads, there we go. It gives me the whole So it gives me, that's the entire cycle of the walks. So what it means is that it's, whilst the walk is live, it's something that people can interact with. You can follow it live. People can come in and pick up on the it's mainly on a Twitter stream. We can add to it afterwards through Flickr, and whilst the thing is still live. And then at the end of it, what you've got is a kind of, it's another kind of map. It's still a representation, but what you've got is it's like a mnemonic of the whole thing, of that experience. So you can go right the way back into a particular time on a particular day, and it kind of sets off the memories and the thoughts and the conversations around that. So that, plus the more developed stuff that I've had when I've worked with the media, is what I'll be presenting at the Saltford Brass Mill in a week's time. But I'll stop it there. There's plenty more to be said. I'll stop it there.